That's the best part. All right. So for me, what was the fun part about the idea that you were going to be last is like, if this was the world tour and tonight's the final show, who better to have for the final performance than none other than the performer himself to be able to sort of put a ribbon on the package that is the 5 questions series. You know, for many of us, what this has been is it's really twofold. I think if you think about it, it's been a way for us to reintroduce those of us who have been involved in the board to people who maybe are a little bit newer to what's going on. But maybe even more importantly is to talk about the Water for Good campaign that we've been busy promoting and raising funds for in the process. And so that part is over. And we're not going to spend a ton on that because there's going to be some more things that we're going to tease out once we get to a place where we can talk about how much money we actually raise. But I think, Dave, for me, for you, like a lot like Danny, you know, you've been here since the beginning, right? And to be the guy that is closing out the concert tour, you know, it really gives you a chance to look back from your perspective on the arc of what we've done in what's 5.5 years worth of our lives now, and you know the role that you've played and your perspective on what you've seen in the time that you've been involved, because your spot is a little bit unique because of the fact that you were a service provider the whole time. And the fact that you've kind of changed spots in that process, but yet your vantage point is different than really anybody else on the board because of the fact that you're in that service provider role. And then the other thing that I think is really interesting is you and I are going to be able to talk about something that really nobody else I've talked to yet about in this process, which is the role of the regional association community in the very early days of PromoCares and how we were able to build some consensus, I think, by virtue of the volunteering that we had all done in a place that then we could turn that into a thing. So like, does that work?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So like, it's
Man,
good. And
has it really been 5.5 years though?
It's been 5.5 years.
Man, it's
yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. And so Danny and I kind of went into the Wayback Machine, and I went back to the original podcast that he and I had done that even predated when the actual meeting that you sat in on happened. And a lot of the stuff that dude was talking about back in the day is things that actually became a thing.
Yeah.
And he was calling it was like Promostradamus is what. Yep. Well, we were like, wow, like how could we have known in that moment some of the things that we were talking about and the ways that they would come true? And I think even for you, like, so for anyone who might be paying attention to this, like when you came to, we're going to have a meeting in Vegas, like, what's your context on the David Shultz's perspective on when that was about to go down? Like,
well, I think I'd have to go back even prior to that. Wasn't our meeting in Raleigh prior to our meeting in Vegas?
Yeah.
So I remember, if you go way, way back, I mean, I'd known who Danny was for a few years. I think it wasn't until the early days of Band Together that I just remember shooting him a note. I didn't know him real well personally. And talking about Band Together and Big Slick and the parallels. And that was when our conversation started. And I went down to Raleigh to experience Band Together for the first time. And we all sat down and had lunch and talked about all the various things we were working on. And it's like, you know, we do some cool stuff out there. What if we could put together a consensus of people that are interested in promoting the good in our industry and figuring out what that looked like? And then I think that was the impetus of going into Vegas and having all those people show up and sit around the table and tell stories about the charities they're involved in and everything else. And it was like, wow, okay, so we're not alone. We can, right. You know, there's something here. Yeah. That was how I got involved. And I agree with what Danny said is, you know, it's like wouldn't it be cool if the search engines would have the ability for you to search for products that had a give back component or an environmental component or, a social good component or what have you. And it's, sometimes I feel like we don't do anything. And then sometimes I look back and I'm like, okay, now all the major search engines have that. We've run some events that have raised a considerable amount of money for really good causes. And even when my participation ebbs and flows based on the other things I'm working on, it's, makes you proud to look back and say, yeah, I was part of that. It's very cool.
The prevailing commonality of all of these discussions is the gratitude that we all feel over, like, if we hadn't just decided we would try, then who knows, right? And nobody had any clue. Nobody had any way of knowing for sure. But, what we keep talking about is, because of the investment that most of us had made in the betterment of the industry in some way, shape, or form, whether that was another volunteer organization like Promo Kitchen, if that was a regional trade association, whatever it was, there was already this thread amongst and between us. But, you and I were kind of thinking about the notion, like the first real time we took this to market was at the Regional Association Council Leadership Development Workshop.
That's right. Yeah.
And what a great way for us to test a new concept in a place where, because we'd been volunteering, not individually, collectively, all of us, and not because we told each other we should, we just already all were. We're like, well, let's go ask these guys if what we're talking about has legs. Well, I mean, what's your recollection of that when we did all that?
Yeah, that was, I think you and I were talking about that a bit earlier. That's one of the last times you interviewed me was on your other podcast. I think I'd just gotten off a red eye from Hawaii and had stepped on a sea urchin accidentally the night before. Wasn't sure whether getting on a 10-hour flight was worth, a smart thing to do or not. And then got off the plane and you promptly interviewed me an hour later. And then we went in and started throwing around PromoCares t-shirts in the meetings. And it was, you could see the heads nodding and just people saying, yeah, I want to figure out how to do this too. Because at the time, there were these outliers doing really cutting edge, innovative stuff that you would sometimes look at and say, like, man, can they actually do that? I always think about Denise and Fairware, and what they were doing at the time was so different than what 99% of the distributors in this industry were doing, to where now I feel like there's a good chunk of the industry that's attempting to do bits and pieces of what she spearheaded back in that day. And so to see the heads kind of nodding around in the room at LDW, be like, okay, yeah, we could do something with this.
All right, so we'll nerd out for just a minute. Those of you who don't care about industry volunteerism, you can press pause, fast forward, whatever you want to do. People who are in the regional trade associations as industry professionals are trying to figure out a way to make their businesses stand out from the competition. It's part of why they spend the money that they spend, right? So whether it's I have relationships with supplier reps, or I get some education that maybe my competitors don't get, I'm willing to spend some money and invest in my success in a way that maybe the guy across the street doesn't do. And what this gave that community was like, well, if you believe this is a lane. This is a way for you to be able to present yourself to your prospects and suspects in a way that would be like, oh, all right, well, that is different, And I mean, think about it, Dave. I mean, give me your perspective on the early days of this. Like, how easy do you remember it being for us to be able to find evidence of what it is that we were talking about back in the day?
It was challenging.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, when we started approaching people like the search engines, and we were initially told that nobody would use these filters, and why should I divert my development team to work on this if nobody's going to use it? So, yeah, it was definitely challenging.
Well, and sometimes the challenge is in the unspoken, what you can't get people to tell you their objections are, people were very vocal about what their objections were and why they didn't think what we were doing was going to meet with the kind of market demand that was going to be necessary to drive the behavior change. And lo and behold, 5 years later, here we sit.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. So from your perspective, so you had a season change in all of this where you didn't change where you were from how you served the industry. You just changed who you did it with. How has this impacted like your seat at commonsku? Like, how's what's going on over here had a role in like a thing like commonsku collections, or some of the other things that you guys are developing for distributors in the marketplace?
Yeah, for sure. I work for a company where they're supportive of any new ideas, and obviously working with distributors that are interested in this kind of thing is kind of part of our core values. And we have a lot of distributors on commonsku today that, are a lot of what they do, it revolves around the pillars of what we do with PromoCares. And to that extent, clearly we're integrated with the search engines that we now have pushed to make sure that those filters are available within the commonsku integration to those platforms. We occasionally create collections that revolve around give back components, things like that. We host every spring a sustainability summit where we invite our suppliers that have the coolest new sustainability ideas to present virtually to all of our distributors, all kinds of things like that. And clearly, if you watch, our SKUcast or any of our other content that we put out, a lot of care goes into talking about those topics because they have bubbled to the top of what we see distributors asking for these days. So
Right.
it's definitely had an impact for sure.
All right. So then on the flip side of that coin is the corollary, right? So have we, PromoCares, as a non-existent tax entity, just a group of people who care, never took a dime in any of this, only just tried to elevate the conversation to a point that it would become more important for our industry. So on one hand, you could say, well, job done. Good job. Excellent. We're done. Where do you come out on that? Like, are we good? Do we have more to do? Like, where do you see PromoCare's role in what's going on at this point and then maybe going forward?
It's, it reminds me in a way of some of the silly commentary I see online when there are holidays for special interests or disenfranchised groups in the community where people are like, well, I don't get my own day. Why do they get their own day? And I want to say like, well, we've had our own day for
All the
hundreds
other
of years, right? Like, so when we first started this, there was a small handful of companies in the industry that were focusing on this, and it's growing for sure. But I'm not sure that it's at the critical mass phase yet where it'll just, at the end of the day, the distributors and suppliers exist to turn a profit or make their shareholders happy, however they're structured. And, sometimes that comes first. So for that to be able to be done in conjunction with, a value system and an objective that meets what we're talking about here can be challenging. There are a small handful of companies really that have been really, really successful at this, being both profitable, able to grow, but also, sticking to their values in terms of the products they're willing to sell and the companies they're willing to work with. So yeah, I don't think we're done yet.
Yeah.
It may not take as much of an effort on our part just to help keep the message bubbling up and, doing some of the things we've been doing in terms of the fundraising for various charities and such. But yeah, I don't think we're ready to retire from this yet.
No. Yeah. And again, for those of you who have watched all of these in a row, you'll hear me say the same thing over and over again. I think it's like, this is music to a certain extent, so like a form of music. And once you learn it, it's really up to you to decide the way that you want to interpret the music that you've learned. And, the best part about it is like when we go to a SKUCon, for me, in a lot of ways, it's like I get to meet some of the other people that are making music in the lane that I'm in. And, it's like, it's fun to interact with folks when you have that opportunity to just
Yeah.
admire some of the work that other people are doing in the same lane. And, it's like whether it's Denise or us or Mandy or Danny or Reciprocity Road or, anybody else that stood up on that SKUCon stage. I mean, your keynote speaker, really, their whole message was built around how they support their community. So, it's pretty clear that we're at that place. But so if we've done a good job, and, we talk about this, Dave, there's no credit to be taken. There's no credit to be had.
Right.
But yet there is some gratification in seeing the way the conversation has become more visible. So then in your mind, what's next for us? Where do we take this train if we're going to stay in the spot that we've been in so far?
Yeah. No, and like I said, I just saw an email that came out today from Dale talking about some of the restructuring being done at PPAI and some of the things they're talking about with a focus on CSR and things like that. It may be ultimately that this is important enough and consumable enough by the vast majority of the industry that it becomes a mission of PPAI or a committee of PPAI. We've talked about that being a possibility in the past. I think when we initially started this, it's like, well, we could become a 501c3 and do all this. And then, over time, I think we've kind of figured out what we're good at. We're really good at rallying suppliers and distributors around a specific cause, whether it be water, mental health, Ukraine, what have you. And, who knows what's next. I saw the survey the other day and there's lots of ideas for the coming year. I don't know. We're definitely good at a couple of things, and maybe some of the other things are better left to people that are out there doing this every day.
And isn't it interesting to be in a position to try to decide, of all of the places we might go, what might we do in a way that could continue to be really the representation of what I would say has been the ethos of what we've done to this point, which is whatever is the hardest, we've been okay with sort of going after it.
Yeah.
And I'll ask you the same way I asked Danny. Did you ever think when we sat around that table at the restaurant in Raleigh all those days ago that we would turn into this prolific fundraising engine?
No, I don't think I foresaw that. I didn't know that was the lane that we would wind up going down.
Right.
But it's been a good fit. It's funny. It's interesting to me that I don't know when this will air, but the recording of this is happening literally 45 minutes after I hosted a webinar for Promo Standards, another organization for whom I've been volunteering for quite a while. And I've been around since Promo Standards was created in the early days. And I think we started with Promo Standards as a data standards organization in the industry, kind of how PromoCares started, and trying to make it easier for people to be more efficient on the Promo Standards side. Whereas, we're trying to make it easier for people to be more conscious of their decisions in terms of running a business. And there's some interesting parallels there. And one of the slides I presented this morning was talking about, we tout the fact that there are 430 suppliers in the industry that have developed Promo Standard services. Sounds like a big number. There's 1,000 distributors that have done their own integrations with Promo Standard services that suppliers host. If you look at the numbers of distributors and suppliers in the industry, that's only 3% of the distributors and 12% of the suppliers.
Wow.
So we have a long way to go. And in that particular conversation, it was the role of the service provider to take those numbers and reach the edges of the industry.
Sure.
for data integration. So in our world, we feel like we've done a really good job and we've reached so many people, but if you break it down by the numbers, it's still probably a fairly small number of distributors and suppliers that have, really taken this on as one of their core values.
All right. So perfect segue, because when you're looking at a set of data, Mr. Shultz, what we really are looking for is, what do they call that? So if 100% is the whole segment size, there's the prime segment. There's
right.
If there's 1,000, there's maybe 150 that you really want. and you're trying to filter to that 150, and because they're your high value. So when we talk about things like promo standards, when we talk about what we're doing at PromoCares, we talk about the way it funnels a collection for you in Common SKU, or a Sage filter tool where you can select a PromoCares product. What we're really saying is we're giving you the chance to hyper focus down to that segment of the database that you really want to be in.
Yep.
And this is where, for once, like data scraping is helpful, because if I know that that's who you are, then I can probably help you faster if I know that that's who you are. So for us, I think what we've been able to do is to create a community that's willing to say, like, market to me that way, because I like the idea of that, because it makes me better at what I do. And this is the lanes I think we're going to continue to see built within the industry, regardless of whether it's minority owned, whatever the segmentation we continue to try to apply to the ways we want to represent product to our buyers, which goes to the whole AI discussion. You and I could have an entire other conversation about the ways that the things that we're talking about are going to fuel search engines of the future. I think it's inevitable in a lot of ways. But when it comes to the value proposition within the context of what we're talking about, within this particular population of people who may even be still listening to what we're talking about, where do you think we're going to be able to gather our data? Is it through PPAI? Do we need to engage our followers more to talk to us, like we've been doing with the survey most recently? Like, where do you see us being able to use tools to learn more about what our people want us to do?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, from a raw data standpoint, I'd be super curious to see usage of those filters in ESP, Sage, Distributor Central, to see how they're being used and how we can impact that if they're not being used as much as we think they might be. And then that might help adjust the messaging accordingly. So
the idea of the fact, really, to me, I guess what I was hinting at is just the notion that anything that you want to improve, the first thing you have to be able to do is measure. And we finally put ourselves in a position where if we decide we want to measure some things, we can establish whatever those measurement statistics are and go pull the data and start to examine what it is that we might be able to accomplish. Because here's the correlation that I want to make. All right. So we've talked about this kind of across the board with everyone on the board, but you right now are in a unique position because you just finished closing the round of fundraising that went with this year's Big Slick. And a little Mandy bird might have told me that you have some pretty shocking statistics to share with respect to what the sale of promotional marketing items attached to this fundraiser have been capable of doing from a fundraising perspective. You game to share some of this?
Sure. Yeah.
Because I think really what we're saying is, if you're down for what we're doing, and what we've established for you is that we're a pretty sophisticated fundraising machine, we're trying to make it easy for you to just adopt what we're doing. And it's because of the collective efforts of people like Dave and Mandy and myself and Carrie. And I mean, literally every one of the board for PromoCares is a pretty prolific fundraiser, but you have the most up-to-date data. So I want you to be able to just blow people's doors off with what you all have been able to do with the sale of merch for Big Slick. But why not, for in case somebody doesn't know what Big Slick is, why don't you frame that first and then jump into the numbers?
Yeah, as I sit here and speak to somebody who hasn't yet been, but we'll talk about that later.
Right.
So Big Slick is a charity event we started in Kansas City in 2010 to raise money for the Pediatric Cancer Center at Children's Mercy Hospital. Actually started initially as kind of general funding, and we ultimately wanted something tangible to put our hands around and kind of dialed in on the pediatric cancer unit at Children's Mercy. We're fortunate enough to have a handful of celebrities, however you want to call them, in our city that are very generous with their time and come back every year to help put this event on. And, it's in 2010, I think our goal was $50,000 and we raised $150,000 or somewhere thereabouts. And so it's grown every year. A few years into the event, we introduced merch for the first time, initially in the form of a single limited edition tee, like we've done for all of the PromoCares campaigns thus far. And it's so within the committee or the board of Big Slick, you have myself, who's in this industry. You have Mandy, whose brother is one of our celebrity hosts, who is a promotional products distributor. You have Joan Keckner-Charbonneau, whose brother is one of our hosts. So you've got 3 people involved in the promotional products industry. So the merch is going to be kick-ass, right? So we started with the idea of a single single limited edition t-shirt, just thinking like, let's take the NPR approach, donate $50, you get this cool coffee mug to drink out of when you listen to NPR in the morning. And we felt strongly about it being for kind of our people who had leveled up to the $100 mark on donations. So we launched the limited edition tee at $100, and it grew each year. This year about 3-4 years ago, we launched a full line of merch because we have a lot of donors that can't afford a $100 donation, but maybe they can afford 30. So we've got a whole line of merch that's, t-shirts, water bottles, hats, what have you, plus the limited edition tee. And this year was just off the charts. It was $181,000 in promotional products merch that was raised as part of Big Slick. $3.5 million total raised. So merch sounds like a tiny piece, but keep in mind with events like this, your biggest donations are those giant sponsors and folks that come in and bid $50,000 to go to a Paul Rudd movie premiere or something. But $181,000 in merch alone that for the most part was donated by our friends in the industry at these suppliers. So 100% of that went directly to the hospital. Pretty amazing year in terms of the impact of our industry on this particular event and how much support that provides for the kids at Children's Mercy.
I'm not even going to try to make that story any better because there's no making it better. Not just the very notion of the fact that when you build a brand over a period of cycles and you get people used to the idea that stuff like that is coming, the demand builds to the point where people can't wait for the next Charlie Hustle big t-shirt because I have them. I have them in their original bags. Never even touched them. As far as I'm concerned, there's going to come a day where we're going to have a PromoCares telethon, and I'm going to have all of these Big Slick KC t-shirts that I'm going to be able to resell because they're limited edition. And there's going to be people who will be like, wait, you have a t-shirt in the bag? Right? So like,
well, I've been offered a lot of money for the ones that Paul Rudd wears, but that's kind of weird. So
that is kind of weird. But you see what we're saying? Like,
yes,
when we talked about originally, when we were trying to establish the mission of PromoCares, at its very core, the idea was to be able to expose people who were listening to our message to when we are at the very best of what our brands are capable of accomplishing. And this is it. This is the epitome when people will line up and pay for things because they know they can't get them unless they do. Because the people who are responsible for the marketing around that product have done such a good job that demand is there and waiting. It's what we want to teach everyone in our space, because if you're good at it, then you are recession proof. You will not be disrupted by changing market conditions. You will be much stickier in what it is that you're trying to do when it comes to staying in business in what is a somewhat challenging business environment, right, Dave? I mean, you're seeing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. I hope we convinced them. What's next for Dave Shultz, the musician?
That's a good question. I think we've got a gig up here at Rock N Brews in a few weeks if you want to come out for that.
Okay. Okay. What's up for Dave Shultz, the pilot?
I don't know. Just, I try to keep current. Actually, I kind of tied music and flying together this weekend. I went on a little scavenger hunt to try and find we had a local artist here that carved Taylor Swift's face into a cornfield to welcome her to Kansas City for the show last weekend. And it was pretty well done. It was pretty impressive. And all I had were the latitude and longitude coordinates. And so got up in the plane and went out on a hunt and found her. So that was my flying adventure this month.
Is there any kind of evidence of this find?
Yeah, there's a video out there.
All right, so I'm going to need that to overlay into this part of the discussion.
Yeah,
All right. Yeah. I'm coming to Kansas City. Are you taking me for steak or barbecue?
I'd say barbecue. I mean,
Okay,
you can get a good steak anywhere, but man, we've got some good barbecue.
Where are you taking me in Kansas City for barbecue?
My go-tos are going to be places like Joe's KC, Jack Stack, Meet Mitch, Char Bar. Those are some amazing ones. Char Bar actually owned by another fraternity brothers of mine and Paul's, friends with Mandy's, that's involved in Big Slick every year. So that's always a good one if you want to tie it all together in a nice little bow.
All right.
So,
and then if we were going to finish dinner and you were going to take me out for some live music, where are we going?
Oh, we have lots of options for that. Downtown, some of the, I still like the smaller places best. I'll go to an arena show or a stadium show, but we had a lot of good bands through the Record Bar downtown, a lot of local bands playing at smaller places. Lots of options.
All right. So Big Slick 2024, give me some kind of win.
I'm thinking early June. So it is when you try to plan an event and you announce the date like the next day, usually most events do, like, hey, here's the date for next year.
Change.
We have a problem with that because we have three things we have to deal with. One, we have to wait for Major League Baseball to announce their schedule because we need a Friday night home game for the Royals. Two, we need T-Mobile Center to be available. And three, we need our 6 Big Slick hosts shoot schedules to be open. So it takes a while to bring all those three things together and pick a date, but it'll be June for sure. We're looking at early June at the moment. So
all right, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Big Slick KC 2024. I'm making a point to finally, after so many years, make a point of being there. Dave, man, thanks for coming in for 50 questions.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.